If you take a walk down the stunning eastern waterfront in the city of Thessaloniki today, feeling the breeze coming off the Thermaic Gulf, you are walking on Megalou Alexandru Avenue.
Right, Alexander the Great.
Exactly. It's this massive sweeping thoroughfare, which is completely fitting for a local boy who literally went on to conquer the known world.
Yeah, it definitely fits the scale of his legacy.
But, and this is the wild part, if you took that exact same walk along that exact same coastline back in the late 1960s, the street signs would have told you a completely different story.
Oh, a completely different story.
Yeah, you would have been walking in the territory of a modern American president. You would have been on John F. Kennedy Avenue.
Which is just, I mean, it's a remarkable geopolitical fingerprint left right there on the asphalt.
It really is. Two men, separated by, over 2,000 years of history, entirely different technologies, totally different paradigms of power, and somehow they share the exact same stretch of pavement.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that is exactly the mystery we are unpacking today. Welcome to this deep dive, and I want to mention right up front that today's exploration is a proud part of Giannis Stefanidis' brilliant podcast project, The Street Has Its Own Story, or as it's known in Greek, Odromos Ekitidiki Toi Historia.
It's such a great project to be a part of.
It really is. So today we are figuring out how a 20th century American politician and an ancient Macedonian king ended up as the alternating namesakes for this iconic road. We're going to dig into who these monumental figures really were, the wild hidden aspects of their biographies, and the brutal mechanics of how they actually achieved their legendary status.
Because when you really lay their lives side by side, beyond the obvious differences of one swinging a sword and the other wielding nuclear deterrence, a staggering pattern actually emerges.
A huge pattern, yeah. Oh, and before we get too deep, for you listening, our sources today include encyclopedic biographies of both Alexander and JFK, some heavy-hitting historical articles detailing Alexander's cultural impact, and a really fascinating transcript from the YouTube channel The Mythologist, which explores some of the more bizarre facts about the Macedonian king.
All of which point to these incredible parallels. I mean, you are looking at two men who experienced meteoric rises to supreme power at just incredibly young ages.
Right.
You see unparalleled, highly manufactured charisma. And most poignantly, you see tragic, premature deaths that just instantly rip them out of the realm of ordinary history and catapult them into eternal, almost untouchable myth.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how Alexander and JFK ended up as the absolute leaders of their respective worlds, we can't just look at their time and power.
No, you have to look at the machinery that built them.
Exactly. These are two very distinct golden boys. I mean, they were born into immense privilege, subjected to relentless grooming, and burdened with impossibly high expectations, literally from the moment they took their first breath.
Yeah, from day one.
So let's go back to the ancient world first. Picture Pella, the capital of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedonia. It's roughly July 20th, 356 BC, and Alexander III of Macedon is born to King Philip II and his wife Olympias.
Now, in our modern framework, a royal birth is, a media event, like magazines and news cameras. But in antiquity, a royal birth had to be framed as a cosmic event.
Right, because legitimacy wasn't just about bloodlines, it was about divine favor.
Exactly. And the historical record is just flooded with these incredible omens that supposedly occurred on the exact day Alexander was born.
So the universe was apparently putting on a massive fireworks show for this kid. I mean, 4 major things happened on that single day, allegedly.
Allegedly being the key word there.
Right, allegedly. So his father's top general, Carmanian, comprehensively crushes the Illyrian armies. Then, the strategically vital city of Potidea officially joins the Macedonian kingdom.
That's 2.
Then, King Philip's prized horse wins a major race at the Olympic Games. And finally, over in Asia Minor, the magnificent Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, which is literally one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, burns to the ground.
Which tells us everything we need to know about how retrospective myth-making works. I mean, did all of those things happen on that exact Tuesday?
Highly unlikely.
Yeah, highly unlikely. But weaving them into a single temporal moment serves a crucial political function.
Right. It signals that this child is inherently tied to military victory, political expansion, athletic supremacy, and the destruction of the old world order in Asia.
And honestly, nobody understood the assignment of myth-making better than Alexander's mother, Olympias.
Oh, Olympias. She is one of the most fascinating, arguably terrifying figures in ancient history.
Truly terrifying in the best way. She wasn't just a queen sitting quietly in the palace knitting. She was a priestess.
Yeah, she was deeply embedded in the esoteric practices of the era. specifically as a priestess in the Samothracian mysteries.
Exactly. And she was deeply involved in the orgiastic cults of the Kaberi.
Wait, hold on. I feel like we need to clarify that. Because when a modern audience hears the phrase orgiastic cult, I think we immediately picture a wild, cinematic bacchanal or some sort of, I don't know, ancient frat party.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So what does that actually mean in the context of ancient Greek religion, and how did it give her real power?
That is a really crucial distinction to make. In ancient Greek religion, orgiastic doesn't mean a sexual free-for-all. It actually derives from the word orgia, which refers to secret rites and ecstatic worship.
Okay, some more about the rituals.
Exactly. These cults involved intense dancing, drumming, and chanting that were designed to induce an altered state of consciousness.
Like a trance.
Yeah, a trance-like state where the worshiper felt possessed by or directly connected to the divine. And for Olympias, being a leader in these mysteries gave her immense spiritual authority. She had a direct line to the gods, which she utilized brilliantly for political leverage.
And she used that authority to essentially claim that King Philip wasn't Alexander's real father.
She did. She pushed this narrative that on her wedding night, a lightning bolt struck her womb, a lightning bolt sent directly by Zeus.
I mean, talk about intimidating your husband. She even kept a tamed snake in her bedchamber, right?
Yes, and she didn't just keep it as a cool pet. She actively propagated the rumor that this snake was the physical incarnation of Ammon Zeus.
Ammon Zeus being the syncretic god, right?
Yeah.
The blending of the Egyptian supreme god Ammon and the Greek supreme god Zeus.
Exactly. By claiming this divine serpent was the true father, she was doing two very specific things. First, she was severely intimidating King Philip.
Understandably.
Right. And second, she was permanently programming her son's psychology.
That is exactly what I was thinking about. I mean, imagine the psychological weight on a child. From the time you can literally walk, your mother is whispering in your ear, "You are not merely a prince, you are a demigod. Your father rules the sky."
Yeah, that permanently alters a developing brain.
It sets a baseline expectation that you are not bound by the rules of mortal men.
It creates a supreme, completely unshakable confidence, but also, an insatiable need to prove that divinity.
Right. So, if we cross 2 millennia and an ocean, we land in Brookline, Massachusetts on May 29, 1917. We trade the ancient Kingdom of Macedonia for the modern political aristocracy of America with the birth of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Obviously, we don't have lightning bolts and divine snakes in 20th century Boston.
Thankfully.
But we do have the modern capitalist equivalent of royal grooming. JFK was born into an incredibly wealthy, deeply connected Irish Catholic family.
And we really have to understand the social mechanics of that specific time and place.
Definitely. The Kennedys were Irish Catholic in Boston. And for a long time, the established Protestant elite, the Boston Brahmins, they really looked down on the Irish immigrants.
It was a very stratified society.
It was. Now, Joseph P. Kennedy, JFK's father, was a man of staggering wealth and ruthless ambition. I mean, he amassed a fortune in banking, Hollywood, and real estate.
He even became the U.S. ambassador to London.
He did. But because of his background, he felt he was never fully accepted by that old money establishment. So he basically decided to build his own aristocracy.
It's like the family business wasn't just making money anymore. It was the acquisition of ultimate power. Joseph Kennedy explicitly expected one of his sons to become president of the United States.
He was functioning as a modern kingmaker.
Exactly. And to make a king, you need the ultimate education.
Which was carefully, meticulously curated. JFK attends the prestigious London School of Economics in 1935, literally rubbing shoulders with global economic thinkers.
And then he graduates from Harvard University in 1940 with what essentially equates to a doctorate in law.
He is being systematically trained in the institutions that forged the global elite. He's being prepared to navigate international diplomacy.
Which, when you look at it, maps perfectly onto how King Philip II groomed Alexander. I mean, Philip knew that a boy who thinks he's a god still needs to know how to manage logistics, geometry, and philosophy if he's actually going to run an empire.
You can't just run an army on divine right.
Right. So Philip hires the absolute greatest minds available. He starts with a man named Leonidas, who teaches Alexander mathematics, horsemanship, and military discipline.
But then, in 343 BC, Philip makes what has to be the most famous academic hire in human history.
Oh, absolutely. He brings in Aristotle.
It's the intersection of absolute raw power and absolute philosophical genius.
Yeah.
I mean, Aristotle wasn't just a tutor giving little lectures on poetry. He was a polymath who had categorized almost all existing human knowledge. He was teaching Alexander history, astronomy, geography, medicine, and political science.
But more importantly, he was teaching him a framework for how to think, right?
Exactly.
Let's dig into that how for a second. How does having a philosopher as a tutor actually make you a better military commander? Because, on the surface, reading poetry and swinging a sword seem kind of mutually exclusive.
Well, it comes down to Aristotelian logic and categorization. Aristotle taught his students to observe the world, categorize it, and understand the underlying systems.
Okay, so breaking things down.
Right. Alexander applied that biological and logical categorization to military strategy and empire building.
Oh, wow.
When he marched into a new territory, he wasn't just blindly hacking away. He was observing the geography, understanding the cultural systems of the enemy, and dismantling them logically. Aristotle basically taught him how to analyze a complex problem and break it into solvable pieces.
So he literally weaponized philosophy.
He absolutely did.
And there is a fantastic story in the sources that perfectly illustrates how deeply Alexander valued this intellectual edge.
Oh, the letter.
Yes, the secret letter. So when Alexander is older, deep into his military campaigns in Asia, he finds out that Aristotle has published some of his treatises on metaphysics back in Greece.
And these were advanced, secret teachings they had discussed privately?
Right. Alexander is furious. He has sent a scathing letter to his former teacher. He writes something like, "How will I surpass other men if what I was trained in becomes common property?"
Which is such an arrogant thing to say.
It is. On one level, it sounds incredibly petty. It sounds like a guy getting mad that his mentor released the premium, paid-tier Patreon content for free on the internet.
That's a perfect analogy.
But on a deeper level, it shows that Alexander understood a fundamental truth about leadership. Knowledge is a tactical advantage. If everyone has access to the highest levels of strategic thinking, you lose your supremacy.
Exactly. And Aristotle calmly wrote back, defending himself by saying that the treatises were published but not truly published.
What does that mean?
Meaning that without having sat in his actual classes and heard his specific verbal explanations, an ordinary person couldn't actually comprehend the depths of the writing.
Oh, that's clever.
It is. But that exchange proves that for Alexander, the intellectual edge was just as vital as the military one.
So we had these two young men, armed with the absolute best education money and royal power can buy.
Right.
But theoretical knowledge is one thing. If you were going to lead a nation, especially if you were going to ask men to die for you, you have to prove your worth in the physical realm.
You need a defining moment of extreme bravery, something that signals to your contemporaries that you have the fire.
You need a public trial. And both men found that defining moment in their youth. Let's look at Alexander's first major public test, which happens when he is just 12 years old. The taming of Bucephalus.
One of the most legendary animal stories in all of history.
It really is. So a horse trader from Thessaly brings King Philip a massive wild black stallion. It has a white mark on its head shaped like an ox's head, which is why it gets the name Bucephalus, literally ox head. Right. The trader wants an absolute fortune for it, but the horse is completely unmanageable. It's violent, rearing up, kicking. Philip's best, most seasoned cavalrymen try to mount it, and they're all just violently thrown off.
And Philip is disgusted. He orders the horse taken away, thinking it's just a useless wild beast.
But 12-year-old Alexander is watching.
And this is where that Aristotelian education and observation we just talked about pays off.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Alexander isn't just looking at a violent animal, he is actively diagnosing the root cause of the violence.
He notices what all the hardened military veterans completely missed. The horse isn't intrinsically vicious, it's terrified.
Yes. Specifically, it's terrified of its own shadow dancing wildly on the ground in front of it as it bucks.
It is a profound moment of psychological insight applied to an animal. I mean, Alexander runs out, grabs the reins, and immediately turns the horse's head to face directly into the sun.
So the shadow falls behind the horse, completely out of its field of vision.
Exactly. And the animal instantly calms down. Alexander speaks softly to it, drops his cloak, and just vaults onto its back, riding it perfectly around the arena.
The crowd is stunned into silence, and then they just erupt.
And his father, King Philip, is literally weeping with joy. He kisses Alexander and says, "My son, Look for a kingdom worthy of you. Macedonia is too small to hold you.
That quote is chilling. But we have to analyze why this matters so much for his development.
Right, because it wasn't just a magic trick.
No, this wasn't just a neat parlor trick. This was Alexander proving to the Macedonian elite, these grizzled generals who would one day make up his high command, that he possessed a unique, terrifying blend of physical courage and intellectual superiority.
He proved that his mind could solve what their brute force could not.
Furthermore, Bucephalus became his absolute partner. They rode together across the entire known world until the horse died of old age in 326 BC, after the Battle of the Hydaspes.
Yeah, and Alexander grieved that animal so deeply, he actually founded a city in modern-day Pakistan and named it Bucephala,
The horse was the first conquest of his intellect.
taming the untamable. Now, JFK needed his own moment of physical heroism. I mean, he couldn't just rely on his father's money or his Harvard degree. He needed to prove he wasn't just a soft, spoiled kid from Boston.
And he finds his proving ground in the absolute inferno of World War II.
Right. JFK joins the U.S. Navy and becomes the commander of a PT boat, a patrol torpedo boat in the Pacific Theater.
And for those who might not know, we should explain what a PT boat was.
Good point. A PT boat wasn't some massive, heavily armored destroyer. They were essentially heavily armed speedboats made of plywood.
Plywood. In a war zone.
Yeah. They were incredibly fast, but highly combustible and highly dangerous, operating in hostile, pitch-black waters.
And the defining moment arrives on the night of August 7th, 1943. Kennedy's boat, PT-109, is idling in the darkness of the Solomon Islands when a Japanese destroyer suddenly emerges from the night and just rams them at full speed.
The PT boat is sliced completely in half. The impact is catastrophic.
A massive fireball of aviation fuel erupts. 2 of the crew are killed instantly.
And Kennedy is slammed violently against the cockpit, sustaining a severe back injury that would literally cause him chronic, agonizing pain for the absolute rest of his life.
But this is where the grooming, the athletic background, because remember, he was on the Harvard swim team, and just sheer willpower take over.
Right. Kennedy's thrown into the water, surrounded by burning fuel, in enemy territory. And he doesn't panic.
He rallies the survivors who are clinging to the floating wreckage, and when it becomes obvious the hull is going to sink, he realizes they have to swim to a small island miles away.
But one of his men is terribly burned and cannot swim.
And what Kennedy does next is the stuff of absolute legend. He takes the strap of the wounded man's life jacket, clenches it between his teeth, and despite his own agonizing fresh back injury, he swims breaststroke for hours.
With the strap in his teeth.
In his teeth, towing the man through the ocean until they reach the island.
And once there, Kennedy swims back out alone into the dark, shark-infested waters with a lantern to try and hail passing American patrols. He ultimately saves his crew and is awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for extreme heroism.
Is it fair to say that towing a man with your teeth through the Pacific Ocean is the modern political equivalent of leading a cavalry charge?
I think so. I mean, Alexander fought on the front lines, taking arrows and sword strikes. JFK fought the ocean and a Japanese destroyer. For both men, these defining narratives of physical heroism were the bedrock of their political legitimacy.
You cannot lead a nation into the existential dread of the Cold War, or an army into the heart of the Persian Empire, if the men behind you doubt your personal physical courage.
That is a perfect synthesis. But it raises a deeper mechanism of power. Once you have the elite education and you've proven your bravery in blood or saltwater, how do you actually maintain the highest seat of power?
Because governing isn't just about raw courage.
Right. It's about mastering perception. It's about crafting a public image, a mythology that elevates you from being a mere politician or a mere king into something, untouchable.
They both became master illusionists.
Let's look at Alexander's primary tool for this. It wasn't just a sword, it was a book.
The Iliad.
Yes. He reportedly slept with 2 things under his pillow every single night on his campaigns. A dagger, representing the brutal reality of survival, and a copy of Homer's Iliad, which had been heavily annotated and gifted to him by Aristotle.
The Iliad wasn't just light bedtime reading for Alexander, it was the blueprint for his entire existence. He didn't just read about Achilles, he fundamentally believed he was the new Achilles.
He traced his mother's lineage directly back to the hero.
Exactly. By carrying that text to the edges of the known world, he was constantly framing his own bloody conquests within the ancient revered concepts of virtue, honor, and eternal glory. He was consciously staging his own life as an epic poem.
But he was also deeply, ruthlessly pragmatic about this mythology. He leaned into the son of Zeus narrative because it was incredibly useful for political leverage, especially when conquering deeply religious societies like the Egyptians.
Oh, absolutely. But he knew the difference between the PR campaign and reality.
Yeah, there's that brilliant moment recorded when he is wounded in battle in Bactria. He takes an arrow, he's bleeding heavily, and his men are starting to panic, thinking their god king is dying.
And Alexander looks at the blood, points to his wound, and says to his generals, "See, comrades, this is real blood, not ichor."
Ichor being the mythical golden liquid that flowed in the veins of the Greek gods.
Right. It's an astonishing piece of theatrical leadership. He is actively acknowledging his mortality to bond with his soldiers, proving he bleeds in the dirt right alongside them, while simultaneously reminding them of the divine rumors surrounding him.
It's a wink to the camera.
It is.
But the absolute peak of this divine branding happened in Egypt, at the Oracle of Ammon-Zeus in the Siwa Oasis.
The Siwa Oasis trek is one of the most bizarre and brilliant PR stunts in antiquity.
It really is. Alexander marches a small contingent of his army deep into the unforgiving Libyan desert to visit this oracle. And as we mentioned, Ammon-Zeus is a syncretic god, perfectly bridging the Egyptian and Greek populations he now ruled.
So Alexander enters the inner sanctum alone. He asks his questions to the high priest, and he emerges. But he adamantly refuses to tell anyone what he asked or what the exact answers were.
Which is genius, because if he tells everyone, it's just a story to be debated. By keeping it a secret, he makes it a mystery. He lets the imagination of his army do the heavy lifting.
The only thing he lets slip is that he heard what his heart desired.
Right. And the prevailing rumor, which he absolutely encouraged, was that the high priest explicitly greeted him as the son of Zeus.
And later, the Apollo oracle in Ionia conveniently backs up this claim.
Suddenly, it's not just a weird rumor his mother started with a snake.
Wow.
It is official, divinely sanctioned geopolitical doctrine. He even hires Apelles, the most famous painter of the era, to paint a portrait of him holding a thunderbolt.
He is literally franchising his own divinity. He is branding himself as a god on earth, making it practically a religious offense to rebel against him.
Okay, so Alexander weaponized ancient oracles and master painters to craft his image. Let's fast forward to 1960. JFK doesn't have an oracle in the desert.
No, but he has a new, arguably more powerful piece of technology for crafting modern mythology.
He is the television camera.
Kennedy's ascent to the presidency is the foundational masterclass in modern political image-making. After serving as a U.S. representative starting in 1946 and a senator in 1952, he aims for the White House in 1960.
And he is running against Richard Nixon, who is the sitting vice president.
Right. Nixon is experienced, deeply knowledgeable, but he is a creature of radio and print.
And behind the scenes, the Kennedy machine is operating at full capacity. Joseph Kennedy's wealth is blanketing the country. I love the telegram his father sent him on Election Day.
Oh, the telegram is incredible.
He wrote, "If you don't get elected president, I'll buy you a country to rule."
It's played off as a joke, but it speaks volumes about the sheer financial and logistical muscle forcing this narrative forward.
Yet, the election was agonizingly close. JFK received roughly 34.2 million votes against Nixon's 34.1 million.
Kennedy won the popular vote by less than half of 1%.
It was a brutal campaign. And the deciding factor, analyzed by political scientists for decades since, was the first ever televised presidential debate.
The optics of that debate are legendary. Nixon had been sick, he refused stage makeup, he was sweating profusely under the hot studio lights.
And his suit blended into the background.
Yes, he looked pale, shifty, and exhausted. Kennedy, on the other hand, who had been resting in Florida, showed up with a deep tan, wearing a dark, sharply tailored suit that just popped on black and white screens.
He looked vibrant, relaxed, and incredibly handsome. He looked directly into the camera, directly into the living rooms of America.
He utilized television exactly how Alexander utilized Apelles' paintings, to project an image of vitality, control, and almost superhuman composure.
Which makes me wonder if we could draw a direct line here.
Yeah.
Was JFK's emphasis on his youth, his vigor, his refusal to wear hats in public just to show off his thick hair? Was that the 1960s equivalent of Alexander the Great deciding to keep his face completely beardless?
That is a phenomenal parallel, yes.
Okay.
Let's look at the cultural psychology of facial hair in ancient Greece for a second.
Okay, lay it on me.
A thick beard was the ultimate symbol of the established patriarch. It meant you were an older, seasoned man of the polis. Alexander violently rejected that aesthetic.
By staying clean-shaven.
Exactly. He wanted to be seen not as an old established ruler, but as the eternal youth, the dynamic, unstoppable force of change.
And JFK did exactly the same thing. He projected this new frontier energy. He made the older generation of politicians look dusty and obsolete.
Both men understood that they could weaponize their youth to disrupt the status quo.
But the reality of power is that once you secure it with that perfect image, you actually have to do the job.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase ends.
Right. You have to manage these massive, incredibly complex, often violent domains. Which brings us to their campaigns, their conquests, and the deeply complex legacies they left behind.
So let's trace the sheer, breathtaking scale of Alexander's achievement first. He becomes king at age 20 in 336 BC, following the assassination of his father.
And by 334 BC, he launches his massive invasion of the Persian Empire. We have to remember what the Persian Empire meant to the Greeks. This was the ultimate superpower. It had menaced, invaded, and burned Greece for generations.
And Alexander just tears through them. He defeats the Persian forces at the Granicus River, at Issus, and finally at Gaugamela. And he does it largely through the sheer mechanical terror of the Macedonian phalanx.
Right, and we should explain the mechanism of the phalanx. It wasn't just a crowd of guys with spears.
No, it was a highly disciplined block formation of infantry, often 16 rows deep. But the terrifying innovation was the sarissa, an 18-foot-long pike.
18 feet long.
Yeah. The first 5 rows leveled these massive pikes forward, creating an impenetrable wall of iron points. The rows behind held theirs at an angle to deflect incoming arrows.
It acted like a giant, bristling military steamroller that simply ground opposing infantries to dust, allowing Alexander's elite cavalry to flank and destroy the enemy.
It was an ancient weapon of mass destruction, and he uses it to shatter the Persian army at Issus in 333 BC.
After that battle, Alexander writes a letter to the fleeing Persian king Darius that perfectly captures his justification for all this violence.
What did he say?
He writes, "Your ancestors came to Macedonia and the rest of Greece and did us harm. I crossed into Asia wishing to punish the Persians."
So he frames the entire invasion as a grand, culturally sanctioned war of retribution. But it rapidly evolves far beyond retribution. Alexander isn't just a raider looting palaces. He becomes an imperial architect. He pushes the boundaries of his empire relentlessly eastward, all the way to the Indus River.
And he anchors this new empire by founding dozens of cities.
He founds Alexandria in Egypt, of course, but he pushes so far into Central Asia that he founds a city in modern-day Tajikistan called Alexandria Eshat,
Which literally translates to the furthest Alexandria.
He is culturally unifying a massive swath of the globe. He is spreading the Greek language, Greek architecture, and Greek institutions across the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. This is the dawn of the Hellenistic world.
But in doing so, he started adopting the customs of the people he conquered, which leads us to some of the hidden, more controversial aspects of his biography.
Yes, as he pushes deeper into the Persian world, he begins adopting Persian royal dress. He demands the proskynesis, the Persian act of bowing or prostrating oneself before the king, which absolutely horrified his egalitarian Macedonian generals.
Oh, they hated that.
They despised it. And he integrates Persian nobility into his inner circle. This is where we encounter the figure of Bagoas.
Bagoas was a beautiful eunuch who was a former favorite of the Persian king Darius and who became intimately close to Alexander.
And here, we must be incredibly careful not to fall into the trap of historical anachronism.
Right, because applying modern labels is tricky.
Exactly. Applying modern 21st century labels like homosexual to Alexander is a fundamental misunderstanding of antiquity. The ancient Greek and Macedonian paradigms of sexuality were entirely different from ours. They did not categorize identity based on gender preference, but rather on social status and power dynamics.
But regardless of the label, the relationship caused friction.
Oh, definitely. The deep intimacy and emotional bond between Alexander and Bagoas was the subject of much grumbling among his old guard and intense speculation in later centuries. It highlighted a political truth. Alexander had deeply integrated himself into the very Persian court customs he had initially set out to destroy.
He became a hybrid, a blend of Greek and Persian. And because of that, his legacy is deeply fractured depending on where you look on a map.
The dual legacy is fascinating. If you look at pre-Islamic Zoroastrian Persian texts from the Sassanid period, Alexander is not the Great. He is known as Gujastak, the Accursed.
He is the apocalyptic villain who burned their glorious capital of Persepolis, slaughtered their priests, and destroyed their sacred religious texts.
But then history takes a bizarre twist.
It does. Fast forward to later Islamic Persia, and the poet Ferdowsi writes the epic Shahnameh. Suddenly, Alexander is culturally rehabilitated.
Right, he's painted as a legitimate Persian ruler, a philosopher king seeking the fountain of youth.
Furthermore, in broader Arab and Islamic tradition, he becomes intertwined with the figure of Iskandar, or Dul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, referencing those coins showing him with the horns of Ammon Zeus.
In this tradition, he is viewed as a heroic, almost prophetic figure who traveled the corners of the earth and even built an iron wall to defend civilized humanity against the monstrous apocalyptic tribes of Gog and Magog.
He goes from being the destroyer of the Persian world to a mythological prophet defending humanity. That is the ultimate testament to the power of his myth.
It really is.
Now let's pivot and compare Alexander as a general conquering the ancient world to JFK as a leader of a modern superpower. Because the way they had to wield power is a fascinating study in contrasts.
The contrast is absolute. Alexander's power was kinetic, direct, and deeply physical. He led from the front lines. He personally charged into enemy formations at the Granicus and Gaugamela.
Right. His authority was built on the visceral premise that he would risk his own body alongside his men. JFK's leadership of a superpower was fundamentally different.
JFK couldn't ride a horse into Moscow with a sword.
No, he was navigating the terrifying razor's edge of the Cold War. His battles weren't fought with spears. They were fought with intelligence-backed channels, economic pressure, diplomacy, and the constant suffocating threat of global nuclear annihilation.
When Alexander made a mistake, a few thousand men might die. When JFK made a mistake, like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the entire human species could be vaporized.
Exactly. JFK had to employ immense restraint, strategic ambiguity, and the power of rhetoric. Which brings us perfectly to that famous phrase.
Oh, from his inaugural address.
Yes, he challenged the American people, saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country."
That quote is the ultimate encapsulation of his leadership style. He was calling for a collective, intellectual, and moral mobilization of his citizens.
And that specific Cold War dynamic, the mobilization of Western democracy against the Soviet bloc, is exactly what brings us back to the asphalt in Greece. It brings us back to why a massive avenue in Thessaloniki was named after him in the first place.
We have to look at the urban and political landscape of the time. The eastern waterfront of Thessaloniki was a massive, ambitious project of urban modernization and land reclamation. They were pushing the city out into the sea, creating a new, prestigious thoroughfare.
Now, let's layer the geopolitical climate over that concrete. Following World War II and the Greek Civil War, the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan had cemented Greece as a frontline, vital strategic ally of the United States.
Greece was essentially the southern anchor of NATO in the Balkans, holding the line against the Eastern Bloc countries to the north.
So in the 1960s, naming this brand new, shining symbol of urban modernity after the charismatic, globally popular American President John F. Kennedy was a deeply deliberate, symbolic geopolitical gesture.
It cemented the post-war alliance on a physical map. It projected a vision of Western democratic alignment, optimism, and capitalist modernity right on the edge of the Mediterranean.
It was the Cold War cast in concrete. But as we know, the street didn't stay Kennedy Avenue. In 1973, the signs came down, and it was renamed Megalou Alexandro Avenue. What caused that massive shift?
1973 is a highly volatile, explosive year in modern Greek history.
The country is under the grip of a right-wing military junta.
Yes. And the geopolitical climate is shifting drastically. There is a massive surging wave of anti-American sentiment across Greek society. This was heavily fueled by the widespread belief that the United States had tolerated, supported, or even facilitated the military dictatorship to maintain stability on NATO's southern flank.
Right, we're just reporting what the sentiment was at the time, not taking sides, but that was the intense feeling on the ground. And this tension is constantly compounding, eventually leading up to the tragedy in Cyprus the very next year.
Precisely. In this powder keg climate of rising domestic unrest, remember, the massive Polytechnic uprising happens in November of 1973, and severe friction with American foreign policy, having the city's most prominent, beautiful waterfront avenue named after the avatar of American power became politically toxic for the regime.
So the regime needs a win. They need to strip away the symbol of the controversial American superpower. But they can't just name the street after a local mayor.
No, they need a name that is completely bulletproof.
So they reach deep into antiquity and they pull out the ultimate undisputed local hero, Alexander the Great. It's a figure of unassailable Greek and Macedonian pride. You cannot protest Alexander the Great in Thessaloniki.
It is a textbook example of how street names are not just geographic markers, they are historical battlegrounds. The street's very name acted as a barometer for the national mood.
Swinging from honoring a vital Western alliance in the optimistic 60s to asserting deep defensive historical nationalism in the turbulent 70s.
Exactly.
But regardless of whose name was on the street sign, neither of these men lived to see their ultimate long-term visions realized. And that brings us to the final, and perhaps most defining, similarity between them.
Their untimely ends.
Their untimely ends, and the vicious battle for their myth that started the literal second their hearts stopped beating.
When a leader dies at the absolute zenith of their power, the shockwave is incomprehensible. For JFK, we all know the tragic, traumatic end.
November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas.
The motorcade, the assassin's bullets, a president cut down in the sunlight at just 46 years old. It left a stunned nation grieving, an unfinished legacy, and a massive power vacuum that was immediately filled by Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson taking the oath of office on Air Force One.
It was a violent, sudden, deeply public end. Alexander's death, on the other hand, was a slow, agonizing, bizarre, and incredibly tense locked-room drama.
Let's look at his final days in 323 BC. He is in Babylon. He has conquered the world, and he is not stopping. He is already planning a massive naval invasion of Arabia.
But he never gives the order for the fleet to sail. The historical accounts give us a strange, detailed sequence of events. He attends an all-night drinking party.
During this symposium, Greek actors perform, and Alexander, ever the dramatist, reportedly recites a passage from a play by Euripides, specifically Andromeda.
And as the dawn breaks and he is finally about to go to sleep, his friend Medius from Larissa intercepts him and invites him to keep the party going at his house for another entire day.
Alexander, who never backed down from a drinking challenge, agrees. He drinks heavily through the next night. And then the fever hits.
It is an 11-day descent into darkness. The fever spikes and breaks, forcing him to postpone the Arabian expedition day by day.
Eventually, his monumental health collapses completely. He loses the ability to walk. The fever ravages his vocal cords, and he loses the ability to speak.
Rumors spread like wildfire through the nervous army that he's already dead, and his desperate generals are forced to let the soldiers file past his bed to say a final goodbye.
Try to picture that scene. The man who conquered the known world. The man who tamed Bucephalus, the man who looked a high priest in the eye and claimed to be the son of Zeus, is reduced to lying paralyzed in a sweltering room in Babylon.
Only able to acknowledge his weeping soldiers by weakly blinking or nodding his eyes as they march past.
And then comes the crucial, empire-shattering moment. According to the historians Aristobulus and Ptolemy, his closest companions lean in over his bed and ask him the most important question in the world.
To whom do you leave the kingdom?
And Alexander, with his dying breath, whispers, "To the strongest," or in Greek, to Kratisto. He also manages to ask for grand funeral games to be held in his honor. And on the evening of June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, at the age of just 32, Alexander the Great dies.
And almost immediately, before the body's even cold, the conspiracy theories start. Just like with JFK, a sudden death breeds immense suspicion.
There's a massive rumor reported by Arian that Alexander was assassinated via poison.
The dominant conspiracy theory was that Antipater, who was his regent governing back in Macedonia, had sent a highly toxic poison.
The rumor claimed it was delivered by Antipater's son, Cassander, in the hoof of a mule.
In the hoof of a mule.
Yeah, supposedly because Antipater feared Alexander was going to have him executed after Alexander had recently executed the historian Callisthenes.
But if we look at modern forensic analysis of the ancient texts, does the poison theory actually hold water?
No, the medical timeline makes poison highly, highly unlikely. We do not know of any poison available in antiquity that takes a full 11 days to kill someone in a slow, undulating, feverish decline.
A poison would act rapidly.
The much more logical, widely accepted culprits among modern historians and epidemiologists are malaria or typhoid fever, both of which were endemic to the swamps around Babylon.
Plus, we have to consider the state of his physical body.
Precisely. His immune system was likely shattered. He had suffered numerous severe, life-threatening battle wounds over a decade of constant warfare. I mean, one arrow had actually punctured his lung in India.
And he was a notoriously heavy and chronic drinker.
And perhaps most importantly, he was suffering from profound psychological grief and exhaustion following the recent death of his closest companion, Hephaestion. His body simply had nothing left to fight off an infection. It finally gave out.
So the God King is dead. But the drama is just beginning. Because what happens to his body next has to be one of the most bizarre heists in human history.
It truly is. His corpse was meticulously cleaned and placed inside a magnificent glass coffin, which was then filled to the brim with honey to act as a preservative.
Honey.
Yeah, he lay in state in Babylon for 2 entire years while an unbelievably elaborate golden funeral carriage was constructed, designed to take him back to Macedonia for royal burial.
So they finally start this massive, slow-moving journey back to Greece in 321 BC. But the body never makes it.
Because of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's oldest childhood friends, a top general, and had just been appointed the governor of Egypt.
Right.
Ptolemy understands a fundamental mechanism of ancient power. Whoever possesses the physical body of the conqueror possesses immense, tangible political legitimacy. In Macedonian tradition, a new king solidified his claim to the throne by burying his predecessor.
So Ptolemy decides he wants that legitimacy. He intercepts the heavily guarded funeral procession in Syria with his own army. He literally hijacks the corpse of Alexander the Great.
He steals the body. He reroutes the entire procession south, taking it to Memphis in Egypt, and later it's moved to a grand mausoleum in Alexandria, the crown jewel city Alexander founded.
And Ptolemy explicitly uses the corpse as a holy relic to legitimize his own newly founded dynasty, establishing himself as the pharaoh of Egypt.
And it worked. The tomb of Alexander became a massive pilgrimage site for centuries. Julius Caesar wept before it. Augustus supposedly accidentally broke Alexander's nose while trying to place a wreath on him.
It is incredible. Even in death, as a corpse floating in honey, his physical body was a tool for geopolitical power. Though there's a fascinating theory that while the body stayed in Egypt, Alexander's actual weapons and armor might have eventually made it back to Macedonia.
Oh, possibly ending up interred in his father Philip's tomb in Vergina.
Which is a beautiful, poetic closing of the loop, if true. The weapons of the son returning to the father who built the army in the first place.
That's a great theory.
And this brings our journey full circle today. I want to remind you, the listener, that this deep dive is a proud part of Giannis Stefanidis' podcast, The Street Has Its Own Story, or Odromos Ekititikitoi Historia. We have spent this time uncovering the dense, violent, brilliant layers of Megalou Alexandro Avenue.
An avenue that honors 2 figures separated by millennia, yet united by a fundamental archetype of human leadership. We see the young, charismatic leader, born into immense privilege and groomed for absolute power.
We see the man proven in battle, deeply concerned with controlling his public image, and ultimately immortalized by a tragic, premature death.
And as we wrap up this exploration of 2 men whose names grace the same asphalt, I think we have to ask a difficult question about the nature of historical eternity. I want to leave you, the listener, with this final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
When a leader dies at the absolute zenith of their power, before the grinding realities of old age, before the inevitable political compromises, or before ultimate failure can tarnish them, they cease to be a mere politician or a mere general. They become a symbol.
They become a blank canvas for our own cultural ideals.
Exactly. If Alexander had lived to be an old, gray, bitter man trying to govern an impossibly fractured, rebellious empire, or if Kennedy had lived to navigate the crushing quagmire of the late 1960s, the horrific escalations of the Vietnam War, and the tearing of the American social fabric, would we still be naming our greatest, most beautiful avenues after them today?
Or is an early tragic death the ultimate necessary ingredient for eternal historical glory? That is the question that lingers on the asphalt. Thank you for joining us on this exploration, for walking this street with us, and for digging into the history beneath our feet. Until next time.